We've reported extensively on the BBC documentary Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone. The film follows the lives of 3 children and one 24-year-old mother in the Strip as they endure airstrikes and mass evacuations. And the BBC took it down just 2 days after publishing it. The reason? It emerged that one of the documentary's subjects, a 13-year-old boy, was the son of Hamas' deputy agriculture minister. And a recent BBC review found that not disclosing that breached editorial guidelines. The journalist who alerted the BBC to that connection is one David Collier. In March, he told the Times of Israel that he caught the BBC, quote, in bed with Hamas. I mean, that's just extraordinary. And in that interview, Collier also said this. They tried to appear neutral by equating a liberal democracy with an Islamist terror organization. They pretend that Hamas and the Palestinians are 2 completely separated entities, as if Hamas is some alien invasion power dropped from the sky. Nothing to do with Palestinians. They do the same with Hezbollah in the south of Lebanon. Somewhere halfway between Hamas and Israel are the normal Palestinian civilians. So all media attention is focused on them. Now Collier has told us a little bit more about what he stands for on the social media platform X. Important to understand why Keir Starmer will recognise Palestine, even though it harms our allies, sets back peace and rewards terrorism. Because the Labour Party is running scared of the Muslim vote. You may as well accept it. Islamists are now driving UK foreign policy. Just to hammer that home, here's another post. So Keir Starmer is going to recognise Narnia in September. Of course, Narnia being a fictional land. And he intends to introduce the definition of Islamophobia. So if Hamas do another October 7th, we will be called Islamophobes for criticising it. This won't change anything in the Middle East, but the UK is so lost. I mean, first of all, I'm not opposed to Palestinian self-determination. I believe in it. But you're then comparing it to a place which literally doesn't exist. Which literally doesn't exist. And this motif of saying, well, Palestine is like Hamas, they're the same thing. Well, Israel, as I'll talk about more in a moment, was founded on violent Zionist terrorism from the 1940s onwards. Actually, you go back to the 1920s. But from the 1940s onwards, it got really, 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 really bad. Really bad. But presumably, David Collier would say, well, we shouldn't just have the Irgun and the Lehi and the far-right ultra-nationalist Zionist terrorists. That's not the same as Jews living in Israel. They're 2 separate things. Surely, David, what is good for the goose is good for the gander. Here's how Novara Media's Ash Sarkar responded. This person is who the BBC has been letting dictate their... I mean, this is crazy, right? When you read it out loud. Letting dictate their editorial policy on the Gaza medics documentary. Unimaginable that someone who talks about being scared of, quote, the Jewish vote would be taken seriously in the way that David Collier is. Completely true. They say the people that say the Muslim vote are the same people if you say, well, the Jewish vote, they say, oh my God, you anti-Semite. Once you start this game of certain interest groups, and you might think we shouldn't be doing that, right? You might be like Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore. No special interest groups based upon things like ethnic background, right? Kind of the French model is a bit like that as well, the Republican French model. Once you start saying, well, the British Jewish community think this, their religious leaders think this, we have to listen to them, they're a minority, which is, by the way, what happened in the 2019 general election. You had the chief rabbi in the week before the general election piping up alongside the Archbishop of Canterbury. You can't say, well, this one little special interest group over here, they can say what they like. But if other people behave in a similar way, well, that's bad. That's bad. They're taking over politics. It's either one or it's none. It's all or none, rather. Of course, the problem is that cat's out of the bag, right? Or don't you dare criticize Israel because apparently these British Jews think that that's, racist, even though many of them don't think that. I know because I speak to them. Helena, your thoughts?
So broadly, I don't think that this is very specific to Mr. Collier. I think that we've seen a large amount of kind of pro-Israel sentiment in this country has been driven by this idea, essentially, that the whole point of this conflict is driven by Islamism. That's been the line that's been gone with. This is what you heard, again, from people like Isaac Herzog when they did the whole Hamas equals ISIS stuff, right? They're trying to get people, especially in the West, to only think of the kind of opposition, the resistance to occupation within Palestine as being part of the fact that the people who are doing those resistance in a lot of cases are Muslims. Not in all cases, of course, there are secular groups as well, of course, but that's what they're trying to say. Well, look, they're Muslim. The terrorists that attacked the United States and the UK, for example, they were Muslims too. Therefore, they're both coming from the same position. And you can see that from what the first statement made in the Times of Israel piece that you read out there, which was this idea that, well, there is Hamas as an entity of the Palestinians is birthed out of an ideological position that these people take. This is a very kind of liberal understanding of how movements can come to be. When, of course, what this completely ignores is the material dispossession of Palestinians, the material relationship between Israel and Palestine, the material reality of the occupation, and of course the funding of Hamas, the deliberate funding by allowing money to go through Qatar into the coffers of Hamas, but that was facilitated by Benjamin Netanyahu to try and divide the West Bank and Gaza to try and make sure there wasn't a Palestinian state. There are material basis for these things because, of course, whilst Hamas and PIJ, for example, are Islamist groups in terms of their own personal ideology, that is secondary to, especially in Hamas's terms, their personal desires and goals, which is Palestinian nationalism. That is what drives it. And a lot of this distortion of the reality of the goals and the aims and the driving force behind Palestinian resistance by trying to conflate it with kind of the desire for Islamic expansionism that comes from groups like ISIS is done to essentially create a culture of fear to try and make people not believe in Palestinian emancipation, as far as I can see. That's my opinion of the narrative that is being spun. And again, I'm not trying to say that this is specific to David Collier. I think this is a broader pro-Israeli narrative that comes from a lot of different people. But what I'm trying to say here is that if you really want to ensure that things like Hamas don't happen, then you have to ensure there's no occupation. And the start of the lack of an occupation is the recognition of a Palestinian state. Like, if you want to ensure that you undermine quote unquote Islamists or jihadists or terrorists or whatever, then you've got to give them a reason not to do terror. You've got to give them a reason you've got to change the material basis for which those attacks are fomented, which is, of course, the basis of the occupation and the dispossession of Palestinians that has been going on for the last 80 years.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. I mean, just looking again at Collier's tweets, because the Labour Party is running scared of the Muslim vote. Keir Starmer did what he did because he was going to lose backbenchers. At least 150, maybe 200 were going to vote for recognition of a state of Palestine. Now, of course, some of those people live in seats where there's a very large Muslim vote, of course. Others of them, and actually most of them, are MPs in seats with a smallish majority, and they know that this issue will kill them as MPs. Not literally, it'll kill their political careers. They will lose their seats. If you're somewhere where you have a 5,000 majority and the Greens and the New Left Party are going to make hay, quite rightly, with this issue, then, of course, you're going to do everything in your power to try and stop you losing your seat. That's kind of how democratic politics is meant to work. Apparently not. Apparently it's all a big conspiracy. And this other one as well, about a new definition of Islamophobia, which by the way, I don't agree with. I don't agree with it. But he's saying if Hamas do another October 7th, if you criticize them, you'll be called Islamophobes. What on earth do you think the IHRA is? What do you think it is? What do you think it is? The IHRA has its definition of anti-Semitism includes certain examples with regards to criticism of Israel. It tries to roll in criticism of Israel into broader framings of anti-Semitism. You're literally, I don't know if this is projection. It must be right. You are literally talking about how free speech is limited when it comes to Israel through discourses of anti-Semitism, which actually aren't anti-Semitism. It's criticizing Israel. They're two separate things. And by the way, the same people say it's anti-Semitic to conflate Israel and Jewish people. They're right to say that. But then, of course, they actually say, well, no, they kind of are the same thing.